And we'll check out what we're doing up here. So it's going to tell me I'm live. I'm live, and that's awesome. Hello everyone. So this live stream is mainly because my other live stream this morning was a complete disaster. In the sense that I screwed it up. We actually had some lovely people turn up and watch and comment, and it was awesome. It's the first one I've done. But I had to use basically Google Hangouts, which doesn't record actually. So there's no live stream for posterity. And there may be no one watching now because most of Europe and America is going to be asleep or at some odd part of the day when they don't want to be watching a live stream. So I've got OBS set up, it's finally working. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of repeat what I did in the live stream this morning. It might not feel as collegiate because it may only be me, but I did promise some people that there would be a live stream and that they would be able to see the recording of it because they were interested in how 016, the latest version of our network rendering software, is looking, because we're going to release it in a few weeks. And I am hopefully going to do a good job at repeating what I did this morning in demonstrating it. So we're going to jump into Blender and we're going to start demonstrating some of the new features of 016. So just remind me, I'm going to switch into Blender so you don't have to look at that infinite regression of the OBS window going into the background. Might take a little bit of time just to get Blender up and running too, because I'm streaming from a laptop and running Blender, so it might be a little bit slow, but we're just going to deal with it. Excuse me as well. I'm not well either, which doesn't make this any easier. I've been coughing and sneezing and trying to sound like I'm enthusiastic. Okay, so here's Blender 2.79. We will do a little bit on 2.8 just at the end of the stream, but mainly going to keep it to focusing on just 2.79 for the time being, just all official launches. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we've changed the panel a little bit. You might notice there's some extra buttons here. If you've been using the software before, if you haven't been using the software before, I'm going to talk a little bit about just the general overview of it, but not go into too much detail. You can look at our documentation online if you want to learn the entire interface. Excuse me. So basically, where you control your render nodes, we've added some stuff here which wasn't here before. So this button and this button went here. I'm not suggesting this is the final layout either, but this stuff has been put in there just basically for people to test and give feedback on. It may look a bit different when the final version comes out. So if you're watching this in a month's time and you think, gosh, it looks different, then yeah, don't use this as a tutorial. It might have changed. So essentially what we've done is we've created a way for you to edit load balancing, which is what this button is about. So I'm going to add a new node and just show you what that's all about. And this was actually a feature that was requested by some users that basically said the automatic load balancing can sometimes be a bit terrible. So they wanted a way to override it, or at least see what the automatic load balancer was doing. So this is what we came up with. So essentially what the auto load balancer allows you to do is come in here and actually set how much of the screen you want each computer to have. So I've got two computers here which are ready to render. So if I give this one half, I'll try and give this one half. There we go. I'll scrub. So I'm going to give both of them roughly half the screen to do. There we go. And that's going to force both of these computers to always render about half of the screen. So I'm going to use, let's just do a Blender render real quick. Just using good old Blender internal, which is gone now in 2.8. So yeah, it's a bit slow because it's doing all this other stuff in the background. So you might have just been able to see there that it did half the screen and then the other half. You can set this to whatever you desire. So if I move this, maybe I'll go for something more like, I don't know, 70-30, roughly. It might be a bit more pronounced now when I do it. Just render that again. You should be able to see that one of those computers will do roughly a third and the other roughly 2/3. Again, accounting for the fact that they're There you go. I don't know, is that a third? It kind of looks like a third. Well, it's 29%, give or take. Yeah, it's taken quite a while. Why don't I just cancel that? So that's what the automatic load balancer does. It's pretty funky. It lets you basically change things however you want in terms of load balancing. So hopefully that'll get around situations where, I'm just going to remove that node, looks like it's not a problem. That helps you get around situations where the load balancer might do something a little bit crazy and you don't like it and you want to control it yourself. Okay, so moving on, we're going to look next at this panel that we've added here. So what this is meant to do is give you control over the codec that's used to compress image tiles. So when I say an image tile, what I mean is, actually maybe I'll just draw a diagram. Can I do that? Can I draw a diagram? Maybe I'll use cubes to explain it. Okay, so imagine this cube is a computer, and here are all the other computers. Yeah, we can do this. And I'm going to make a plane which is going to be the image from each one. So there's an image that gets drawn by this computer. This is fun, I'm actually using Blender to do educational stuff. So let's just imagine this is the computer you're working on. These are other computers which are rendering for you. Now when these guys render, they produce an image. Let's just pretend this is the image. Now when they send this image, it's going to be in a particular format, and you can select what format this image is in. So you can select whether it's EXR, well in the case of Crowdrender it's always EXR because that lets us do things like multiple render layers, multiple passes, but what you can select with this menu is you can select the compression format that gets used when this image file is generated. And that's really important because if you select none, then you're getting just the raw EXR file, pretty much the same data as what came out of the render engine. But the files are going to be huge, like none on the default scene like this, for half standard definition, one of these chunks is going to be, if there's two of them, two chunks, then it's going to be about 18 megabytes. So it's pretty big. By contrast, PXR24, the file size is going to be around about 100 kilobytes. So it's around about 100 times smaller. I think that's 100 times smaller. So that's going to impact your render time because obviously, by way of analogy, if my computer's got a long distance for the data to travel, let's just say over the internet, or it's got a really slow network, you know, the bigger this file gets, the longer it's going to take to squish it through the internet or through the network. So if all of the chunks coming back are like 20 megabytes each and you've got a slow connection, then it can make the render time per frame go up. But you can, if you just want to do a few tests, select something like zips is pretty good. We've tried zips where no compression is about 18 megs, zips is about 300 kilobytes to half a meg, so it's really good in terms of packing down, and it's also lossless. Some people like to use non though, just because they know there's no compression, nothing's happened to it, it hasn't corrupted anything. Particularly with, I've had some people voice their concerns about things like vector passes, whether the compression can accurately deal with vector data as opposed to image data. I'm not an expert on those, but now you can control all of this yourself, so you're not stuck with a default. So we had a default hard-coded which you couldn't change. We used the DreamWorks Animation A, that's what DWAA stands for, lossy. And that was the one that we used because it was a really good trade-off between how the images looked to our eyes and the size of the file. It's maybe just a little bit bigger than PXR24, which if you remember was 100 kilobytes versus 18 megabytes with no compression. The DreamWorks Animation A is probably a little bit bigger, maybe between 100 and 150 kilobytes, but still way smaller than 18 megabytes, which means you get, I guess, a good balance between the time it takes to transfer the image chunks and the fact that you've compressed them, so you've lost some data. Where I think DreamWorks Animation might be of concern is if you're rendering out anything that you want to use as a HDR input. So if you're rendering an image which has a lot of high dynamic range in the image, then maybe none is the best option for you. Again, you can experiment with this yourself and test. So beforehand, without this panel, you'd have just been stuck basically. But now you're not stuck, you have the freedom to just choose none, which is effectively no compression. It's almost as if the render engine was spitting it out straight into Blender on your master node without any compression at all. That's pretty much effectively what it's doing. But yeah, be warned, huge file sizes. Okay, so the next thing that we've done, which might be a little different, if you've used 015, you will have remembered that we didn't have a little settings menu here. The only thing you could do with the local machine was turn it on and off, and the local machine pretty much obeyed render tile and render device settings which you set down in performance, so it would have used these settings. We changed that because having them here and having to remember to come here and set them might have been a little bit counterintuitive or annoying. And also, if you want to choose what device Crowdrender uses on your local machine, so when I say local I mean master, so we're looking at this being the computer that you're working on, in my analogy of here are computers which look like boxes. So the local is the machine that you're working on. And now you can actually open this up and you can change the render device and the tiles in here rather than having to, well look, if you want to change the render tile before in 015 you'd have to go down to this panel, where is it? So this one. Otherwise, and also for, excuse me, for the render device you'd have to go into System and set it here. Whereas now those settings are all conveniently located in this little menu, which makes it just a little bit easier for tweaking stuff if you decide that you want to render on your GPU on your master or local machine and not your CPU because you want to do other stuff, and you have a GPU, you can set CUDA and you can select your device. Now, I'm on a Macintosh laptop that doesn't have any GPUs. I'm actually testing a lab today with workstations which do and making sure this all works properly before we release it, and it is. But if you had a GPU, either an AMD or a Team Green NVIDIA one, it would show up here when you selected that. Well, I'm going to select CPU because I don't have a GPU. Okay, so I'm now going to just move on to talk a little bit about connecting. Now I noticed there is only one person watching, so that one person, if you do want to chuck a comment there and ask any questions, feel free to go for it. Otherwise, I am just going to motor through this. As I said at the beginning, this is mainly for posterity, for the people who asked me. They wanted to see a live stream recording of what I did this morning, but I screwed it up, so I'm actually just repeating what I did this morning. Okay, so connection. So we're going to look at how connections changed. It hasn't really changed a huge amount, but hopefully it's changed in a positive way. So now when you want to connect to a node, you enter its host name or computer name. We've got some resources on our website for finding that if you're not sure what that means. A couple of ways you can connect. As per normal, you can just hit this button and it will bring up the window saying this is the host name and this is the IP address we've found. You can edit this if you don't think it's right. Most of the time it's going to be though. The only time when you have an issue, it won't actually show an IP address. So if I just type a new node, which is not a real host name, if Crowdrender can't find the host name, there'll be a brief pause while it looks around and tries to find it. It's going to look in a few places, and then it will basically put that node in this section here and say, if you can give me the IP address, then I can try connecting, but otherwise I can't. And then you go, okay, and it says, no nodes had addresses to connect, and everything's fine. You just exit out of the menu. This button here is the more interesting one because it allows you to connect to everything. What we've done here is made a couple of cosmetic changes, but also an under-the-hood change, which makes this work a hell of a lot better. It used to be that if you had a list of, let's just say, 10 nodes, and it takes about 3 seconds for Crowdrender to check each one, it would have taken 30 seconds for this menu to appear, because it did each one in sequence, in series. Now it does them all in parallel, and you'll see that if I go ahead and add, shall I add 10? Shall I risk making an idiot of myself on the internet? Yeah, why not? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this would have taken 30 seconds, so I'm just going to count out loud now and cross my fingers and hope I've done my work properly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... Oh, there you go. 5 seconds. Not 30 seconds, though. so a little bit longer than 3 seconds. And you can see what it's done is it's separated the nodes out, which is the cosmetic thing I was talking about, so that everything that it's not certain about and couldn't find an IP address is up here, and you can put an IP address in if you know it. It does happen occasionally that Crowdrender can't find the IP address given the host name. Now it couldn't for these because these aren't real host names, I just chucked them in there at random. But nodes where it has found the IP address and you're ready to connect, we'll put them here in the bottom and it will show you the IP address. I think this is better. Obviously I'm looking for feedback, so if you're watching this either now or post live stream, feel free to leave a comment on the video. This way I like it personally just because I can see that it's actually worked. It's got an IP address, what the IP address is, and then I just hit OK and it goes and connects to all of the computers where it had an IP address. In this case it's going to try and connect to this one up here. So that's pretty much connection. The changes that we've made, hopefully they're better. I mean, certainly if you've got a lot of computers, being able to quickly connect to a whole bunch of them, and you don't have to wait like 30 seconds or even minutes if you're going to press this all connect all button is a lot better. But I'm not the grand poobah of what is good in the software world. That's interesting, it just sync failed. Here's a good tip for you. If you do get a sync fail, a couple of things you can do to try and fix it. I know why we did, it's because we added stuff to the scene. You can just come in here and click that button. And this just resyncs individual machines. This was added in 015 because the only way to do it prior was to hit this button, which resyncs everything. But if only one machine is resynced, it's kind of pointless to waste all that bandwidth on sending the blend file to all of them again if they're all fine. So this little menu contains that handy little just resync just this one machine, whereas this button is all of them. Okay, so that's pretty much connection. There's another thing I want to show you, which is a little bit different. If we go to the add-ons section and we'll look at the actual add-on panel for Crowdrender, tick this little, or press this little arrow button, go down. You'll notice we've tidied up a little bit in here, so we've given each section its own little box, which hopefully just sort of makes them stand out from each other. I'm not going to do too much of an explanation here. The other thing that we have actually worked a bit on is zip logs is now a much better user experience, because when you press it you'll notice it opens up, as it used to do, the file save dialog, but this time it selects the desktop by default, not the directory of the blend file, because it's saving log files, so we want to put them in a place where you can find them a bit more easily. And it also names the file for you and puts the right extension at the end of it. It used to have an extension of .blend, which meant all the log files you sent us looked like blend files. So we've changed that now, so it looks like a zip file, so when you press zip logs, you know to look at the desktop and look for a zip file with this name. You can of course change the name if you want, but we've made it this way so that it saves it with the computer name, which means when you send us log files from different computers for troubleshooting, we know which computers they came from, and all you have to do is basically hit zip logs. So it's basically two buttons, you just hit zip logs and then zip logs again, and it will save the right file to the desktop, and then you can send it to us. And you can use this button if you want to report an issue, which will open up a place where you can actually upload that zip log. Okay, so the last and probably most important thing I want to talk about for transparency reasons is automatic upload of analytics. Now, I don't know what you guys think about apps automatically sending data off to a server somewhere, but we have done that. That's what this is, and I'm telling you this so that if you don't like it, you can just turn it off and save your user settings. It is switched on by default, so please remember that. The reason we've done this is, I guess, to improve the software, we need to be constantly getting data about when it's not working. So what is uploaded when you have this enabled is basically logging statements in our code that tell us about errors, warnings, or anything critical. It doesn't do crashes yet. That's a bit more difficult because if the process has crashed, it can't really do any logging, it's dead. But what it will do is log things that we have specifically looked for, which could be a problem. This really helps us because we can actually then see which problems happen the most often and actually prioritize things. We've tried in the past using user reports, but the problem with that is we have lots of users. I mean, almost about 2,700 people have downloaded Crowdrender now, so that's quite a few, but we don't actually get a huge amount of error reports or problems. We get ones here or there. So we decided to do this in an effort to basically, from a statistical point, just see which are the biggest problem areas in our add-on that generate the most warnings and errors, and focus on fixing those. So that's what it's about. It's about improving software. As I'm sure everyone who does this will tell you, it doesn't really log anything else, at least not yet, and if we change that we'll let you know. There will be an update to our terms and conditions, but I just wanted to be transparent and let you know that this will be uploading errors and warnings that happen in our add-on. It doesn't upload anything about your blend file or anything about your use of the add-on really, other than just there was an error or there was a warning and this is the part of the code that did it. Okay, so that's what that's about, and I think this is a good thing. It's going to help us make better software, which is the point of the whole thing. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is the new model for the load balancer. So this, again, is a little bit abstract. It's kind of hard to do. Maybe if I start a new... I'm going to try and sort of demonstrate to you what it does. So the load balancer kind of works a bit like this. In cases where you've got two computers, it's going to try and figure out how much of the screen like that to give to each one. So we came up with a new load balancing model that uses a bit of clever math to try and calculate this. It used to be that we had a model which used a different mathematical way of determining it. This one's actually a bit more intuitive because it's all based on how fast something took in the past, so the previous time you rendered. So basically it records the seconds per pixel sample, if I've got that right, and uses that as a way to figure out, okay, so if this guy has really got a really low seconds per pixel time, I probably want to give him a bit more of the scene. So that's pretty much the change. It just works on speed. Like if something's really fast, it's going to give more of the screen to it. But the other thing that it does is very different, is it never gives the same part. So in the olden days, sorry, not the olden days, the old method, Crowdrender would have always given the same bit of the screen to the same machine over and over again, and it might have changed a little bit based on performance, got either smaller or it might have got bigger, but this machine would always have started on the left and had this part of the screen to do. Now it changes. It'll have this side on one render, it'll have that side. It's essentially random. And what this does is it sort of avoids bias in recording the performance data. Because basically, imagine if you had three machines and this guy always gets this spot. It might get sort of maybe a bit bigger, maybe a bit smaller. Then his sample time is going to be really small, but artificially so compared to the poor computer that gets the middle bit. So we made it so that the computers always swap where they're rendering the screen, so we get sort of an average, and that's a much better way of predicting how the computers are going to do on any given frame. The other change obviously was the one I just went through, which is load balancing. So, we've already discussed how you can set this. You can set this to whatever value you feel like, and then render, and it will render in those proportions. Otherwise, you can leave it on automatic, and the algorithm I just described is going to try its best to figure out how much of the screen it's going to give to each computer. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers most of the features. I want to quickly talk about some of the fixes that we put in this. So the first one is Linux users have experienced some pretty bad lag. It's been very slow, particularly on large files, but even on default scenes, we've had reports of just the add-on being enabled and it making Blender unusable, and it's only Linux that does this now. We did have lag for other operating systems, but that was fixed in 0.15. But we didn't immediately figure out exactly what was going on with Linux. And it was only a specific version of Linux for us in the lab. If you're different and you have a different story, please write in, let us know. I'd love to hear about it. But for us, what we found is that when we upgraded to, I think we're using Ubuntu, and it was when we upgraded to Ubuntu 18.04 LTS, then we had the issue. That's now been fixed, so there is now no more lag, as far as I'm aware. Certainly eliminated it for us when you're using Crowdrender in Linux, and it doesn't matter what file size, the lag is pretty much gone, other than the lag that you get from Blender when you put just, you know, like an insane number of polygons in it. So that bug has been fixed. We fixed in 0.16 when it comes out. Another issue that we were told about is we had lots of people who couldn't enable the add-on. They were getting a traceback error, and that error basically said that essentially it was that Crowdrender was installed in the wrong directory. There is another error that people get when people enable it, which is due to a missing DLL, but you can solve that really easy by just go to a website in our troubleshooting section. There's actually an article we wrote about how to fix not being able to import a DLL. I won't go into that here. But this particular one was interesting. Crowdrender is meant to be installed into your user directory. So if you're familiar with how user directories and application settings work, every application, if it's installed into your computer, it won't have your user data installed with the application. It will have your user data stored in your user directory. And Crowdrender actually gets installed into your user directory most of the time. Some people manage to get it installed into the actual Blender directory, which for the add-on previous to 0.16 broke it. But we've now fixed that, so if it does end up in your Blender directory, it should be fine. It was a simple fix, but we've now fixed that. Finally, we had a few users, again on Linux, basically saying that Crowdrender was telling them that they didn't have the right version of Python. That has also been fixed. There may be a few other issues that we fixed, but they're the big ones that people actually, as a group, complained about. Okay, so that sort of, I think, covers off for 0.16, other than to say the project for 0.16 is pretty much done. We're now just looking for people to test it, including the people who have written in with bugs, because there's stuff in there that's supposed to fix it. So if that's you, we'll send you an email saying, here it is, please test it. And please do, please test it, try it, make it sure that the bug you reported is actually fixed, because then we can actually confidently release the software and close the bug in our system, which is awesome. The plan is there'll probably be a couple of weeks while we just do some final testing, and then a couple of weeks of user testing, and then maybe another week of bug fixing, and then finally just releasing it. So we're talking about a month maybe until 0.16 will be out. It could be shorter, not sure, it depends on what people find. Like if it's perfect from the moment we release it to people and they don't find any other issues that we were supposed to fix that we hadn't, then it'll be released in probably less than a month, maybe 3 to 4 weeks. So that's 0.16. Now I want to talk a bit now about Blender 2.8. We do get asked a little bit now about, are we compatible with 2.8? If you haven't seen all the videos that I've been publishing about Blender 2.8 and Crowdrender, then check them out. They're on this YouTube channel. And from those you can pretty much tell that yes, we are working on making the add-on compatible with 2.8, and we have managed to do distributed rendering in Eevee and in Cycles, so it is working. But it's probably not a good time to release it. I guess I've been chatting to a few other people who are watching what's going on with Blender 2.8 and making the observation that there are a lot of tutorials out there for it and a lot of hype about it, but it's still not in its final form. And for us as people that make software, we've been trying to make it work. We've got it to work, but then another daily release has broken it again. So at the moment we're not really sure if we released it whether the next daily release would break it. We could release a 2.8 version of 0.16, which is what we're planning to do, but we had hoped that the beta version would be out by now, and it's not. So we're kind of pondering what to do. if anyone wants to test Blender 2.8 with 016, let us know. As long as you're okay with the fact that any day now Blender could release into the daily build and it would break it, then I see no reason why we shouldn't allow some of you to test it. But I just want to make it clear that it's already happened to us, that another daily build has broken what was previously working, and then we have to go and fix it. It's probably going to be a lot more stable once the beta's out and they've finally settled with the Python API, that there's not going to be any more changes, because that's what's been affecting us. Now all their changes are actually up on the internet, but they're just not rolling them out all at once, which makes sense. Once they have though, and we have a beta, then you'll be seeing a release for 016 or whatever version we're up to by then, because obviously we're starting work on 017 once 016 is out. Alright, so the next thing I want to chat about briefly and wrap this up, this is going to be a bit of a shorter stream than this morning because we don't have any questions, is the beta project. Yay, beta. So the beta is our project, not Blender 2.8 beta. Gosh no, I wouldn't know where to begin trying to do something as crazy as build Blender beta 2.8. But we have a beta project. If you've been following us for a little bit, we had a crowdfunding campaign in May, which didn't work, but people are still wanting to give to it. So we moved the campaign from Indiegogo to our own website, and it's still there, and still people are donating to it, and the aim is to use the funds to build the next generation of Crowdrender, because it needs some pretty major overhauls. They're actually nothing to do with Blender 2.8, so although we may have said in the past, hey, you know, crowdfund us, will make something that's compatible with 2.8, I'm just being honest. We've already managed to get it to work with 2.8. It wasn't really a huge job, so we'd rather put most of our effort into what we want to do. And you might be asking yourself, or asking me, what do we want to do? What's the vision? Basically, it's to allow you to connect to any computer anywhere that you're allowed to, right? We're not going to let you just hack into like schools and use all of their, you know, terminals and computers and workstations to render. It's basically about being able to get computing power from anywhere. Firstly, from obviously your own network, the computers that are in your own network. Then you can team up with people through the internet. So if a couple of artists want to work together and share all of their computing power to render the project they're working on, they can be able to do that really easily using Crowdrender. And then we want to go a step further. If you want to team up, use all the computers that you and your fellow artists, or get your friends even to donate. If all of that is still not enough, then we're adding the cloud into the mix, so you can actually add nodes from Amazon Web Services and boost the render power up to the level you need it to get things done by the deadlines that you have, or just to make it faster for fun. Why not? Speed is fun, at least in computing anyway. Non-speed in computing is very boring and dull. So that's the basic vision of it. It's basically giving you the power to get as much computing power as you possibly can for a reasonable price. Obviously, if two of you decide that you want to share computers, then you don't need to pay sort of a rental for those computers, unless you want to agree that between yourselves. It's up to you guys. So the vision for Crowdrender will be like just computers from anywhere will be able to be utilized for rendering. So that's what we're working towards. We're also working on some pretty serious improvements in stability. Robustness is a word that we've been using quite a bit, making sure that the rendering always finishes, even if you just end up with all of your computers dying except for one, all struck by lightning, nothing to do with the software, and just smoking holes in the ground, but one laptop is still alive. It will finish. Other things we're going to look at is just efficiency, just making the load balancer really efficient. That's actually the first goal that we're crowdfunding for. It's a goal of 10,000, and we're pretty much at about 1,800 now. So we've got a little bit of a way to go, but people are still giving to the project, so we're confident we're going to get there. That's going to be a great tool to have, because it's a completely new load balancer. So I talked today about, we've given you a way to override the current one, and then there is a good reason for overriding the current one, because it does make mistakes, and also it's not as flexible as it could be, and not as want to use the term greedy. We want to design a more greedy load balancer that uses all of the available power all of the time. One example of that is, I'll just do another quick analogy here, is if you have a computer that just does this bit and finishes really fast, and the rest of this image is still being worked on, in the current load balancer, I'm sorry to say, this computer just sits there waiting for the other one. But there's no reason why it couldn't join in and help this other computer finish this tile. So the project that we're working on, which I've just described as our first milestone goal, the crowdfunding campaign, is going to be to create a load balancer that can actually do things like that. So if it detects that there's a computer that's just sitting there doing nothing, it figures out, oh, I could use that computer to make the rest of this run much faster. Seems out it's finished doing this bit. Obviously there are going to be other improvements above and beyond that, but that's pretty much the major one. That and making sure that if all your computers die, the render will still continue. It involves some pretty major surgery to the code, so it's why we haven't gone there yet. It's a pretty huge job, because it pretty much involves getting rid of the current method of balancing computers and replacing it with a brand new one, which with brand new ideas in it as well. The one I just described being one of many. So, but what it will mean to you as a user is you'll get much more speed out of the computers you do have, because it will be far more optimal. There'll be no waiting, like I just described, where if this computer finishes and this one's going on and on for hours and this one just sits there doing nothing, that won't happen anymore. And also, I think the bigger thing is you'll be able to use a lot more computers on a scene before you notice that it's not worth adding them in. At the moment, I think, you know, if you were to add maybe around 30 or 50 computers, after that you might not really have any point of adding any more, because there's just too much overhead. So one of the jobs for the project is to actually look at ways of eliminating that overhead, so you can go to 100, maybe even 200 computers for a single scene. And then look at ways that we can do frame splitting as well as tile splitting, so that you can basically add as many computers as you can possibly get, even 1,000 if you can get them. And we're talking about an animation now, and it would be able to basically distribute that 1,000 computers over the entire animation optimally, so that it would finish super quick. So that's pretty much, I guess, a good overview. That's pretty much, I think, what we talked about this morning. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's been entertaining, maybe even, just watching me. Well, maybe not entertaining, maybe I won't go there. But if you like these kind of videos, if you like the live stream format, I know that a lot of guys, we had about, not a huge crowd, probably about 8 people watching this morning, and lots of comments and lots of fun, and it seemed to be a cool thing to do. So if you're watching this post live stream and you'd like to see more live streams and join in and talk to us live as we're demoing the software, then let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. This kind of stuff we love doing, and if you encourage us by liking, subscribing and sharing, we're going to do it more often, and we're going to get better at it too, and we're going to make better software as well, because we get more interaction. And we really believe in the design thinking approach, which is a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, but basically design thinking is just basically realizing that it's the user's needs that drive the design of the software, not so much, you know, a guru who thinks he knows everything, because I'm definitely not that. I can design software pretty well, but I'm not a guru in visual effects. I'm an aspiring one, I guess you'd say. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. It's been awesome doing this video. That one person who's been on the whole time, I was kind of hoping they'd drop a comment and say like, hey, it's such and such, but they haven't done that yet, so I guess I'll just have to remain in wonder as to who that one person was. But it's coming up to 40 minutes, and I think that's more than ample for what I want to do. Thanks guys, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, thumbs up, all that. If you hated this video, thumbs down, and I promise you will never do it again. But we are going to plan another one for the end of this week regardless, because we want to just try it a few times before we throw in the towel, or before we invest everything into it because it's fantastic. We don't know, it's fun, it's experimentation. Awesome fellows and ladies and gentlemen and all that stuff, I am going to go into the infinite regression of the OBS window and catch you next time.